Okay, Sharon, we're here to answer. The question on everybody's mind is the bass amp dead? What do you think?
I think it's dead for certain occasions.
Yes.
I love me a good amp, but do I love me an amp always? That is the big question.
Right. Not always, I suppose. So many stages are going silent, whether you play in church or sometimes on pop gigs, even wedding bands and stuff, right? Like the IEM thing. In-ear monitor, by the way, IEMs stands for in-ear monitors. Sharon and I are both wearing them right now. If you're watching the podcast, we have them in. That's how we hear ourselves. And we thought we would do an episode today talking about this, I don't know, kind of like dichotomy. This is sort of a binary between like amps or no amps. And obviously you can have gigs that do both. I do. Sharon, I think you do as well. Or maybe you're just, okay.
My main gig is no longer...
No amps.
No amps whatsoever. Yeah. I haven't played an amp in forever on that.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of using amps on stage versus using IEMs on stage. We're going to give you some brand recommendations.
We're going to talk about pricing. I feel like IEMs come with...
Ooh, big. It's painful for the wallet.
It's a little painful for the wallet. There's big ifs. I mean, it kind of depends, right? And
yeah,
we're going to get there, I guess.
And we'll talk too about why you would maybe consider switching one way or the other. But okay, first of all, let's do this. Let's talk about when I say silent stage, I typically mean if you're playing a gig and there's probably drums. So really the only sound on stage is drums. And this happens maybe at churches where, even a drummer will be behind some kind of drum shield, or at wedding gigs where there's no amps, no wedge monitors on stage because everyone is monitoring through in-ears, but the drums are kind of the loudest acoustic instrument. So it's not technically a dead silent stage.
Well, I guess if you had someone with an electric kit, it would sound really funny because
it just gets lamer and lamer. Okay, why would anybody want a silent stage?
Ooh, I'm so glad you asked because I do think that silent stages, I'm not sure when they started exactly, but I do think they suspiciously line up well with the rise of content.
Interesting.
And I think they started a little earlier than that because it technically, if done right, gives musicians a little bit more freedom on stage. Like, let's say, I'm sure everyone has experienced, I can't hear my bass, I can't, like, all of that stuff. Thank you, Jerry, for your ball contribution. That thing of you can't hear low end in a large room because you're having, the engineers having to compensate your low end, especially for bassists. I find it's really hard on stage and everywhere because it's so boomy in the hall that the bass is the first thing that gets cut, and then you don't get that like fun slapback that everyone gets in a hall. So it's like, I feel like we experience it really badly. So with in-ears, you eliminate that because you now have bass in your ears, and you're not like, oh, can you turn out the bass? There is situations in which it doesn't work either, and we'll get there in a little bit. But overall, I think it gives the musician a little bit more freedom. But I do think because of the silent stage, it makes it easier to mix quickly and give you...
For front of house.
Well...
Or for on stage.
For like if you record it, because you don't have all of this like audience... I mean, you have audience sound, obviously, but like you're not having to cancel out everything. It's a very easy, basic mix, almost like you just recorded
Things are isolated because not everything is blending. You don't have a ton of bass blending into the drum mics. You don't have guitar blending into the vocal mics. Yes.
So like,
I see
I'm not an engineer. I can do basic mixing for stuff. And now let's say I have a gig, I have an in-ear monitor system, I show up with that thing, I get my engineer to record it, and now I can take that file home. I recorded something snazzy with my phone. I'm quickly going to do a quick mix because I don't have bleed that me, who doesn't really know how to mix well, has to deal with. And I'm just pushing that up on IG. Like, I do think it's like an oddly suspicious timing that both of these things are going along really, like,
It's so interesting that you're coming at silent stage from the band perspective.
Oh, 100%.
I wonder if anybody else agrees with Sharon, because I have never thought that before. Not to say that I think you're wrong. I'm just blown away, because to me, it's the absolute opposite. To me, it's front of house. So any situation that I have ever been involved in, it is never the band that has wanted a silent stage for like content. But I love that you're talking about this, because it totally makes sense. But in my world, the silent stage thing started because front of house was tired of dealing with blaring guitar amps and super loud crash cymbals and big boomy bass rig, because then you can't get the vocals up in the room enough. And so even on, professional tours, I went out, name drop, opening up for Kelly Clarkson in 2015, and her band was lamenting. It was the first time that they had done, I think, a silent stage. Lester Estelle was playing drums. So there's drums, but there was no bass amp. There were no guitar amps. It was all fractals. They were all using like a fractal multi-effects. I think there was a live B3 that was way tucked in the back, mic'd up, so you could faintly kind of hear that if you were side stage. But it was, and they were bummed out about it. Now, these are guys, this would have been guys in their 40s and 50s that had for sure come up in amp world. And they were pissed. They were adjusting. Some of them enjoyed it. Some of them were bummed out about it. But it was not at all to do with them wanting to make content.
Of course
it was
not.
about wanting front of house demanded it. And that's the same in church world too. Like in big, like mega church world, gospel church world, I think it went from, you've got a bunch of stuff on stage and it's kind of crazy and the chips are falling where they may, to this thing of like, well, front of house needs separation. But you know what I'm just realizing, Sharon? Some of that is for broadcast and some of that is for recording.
I was just about to say, because a lot of the mega churches get broadcasted as well.
Totally.
So it makes
totally
sense
right.
for them to have a silent stage massively. Yes.
You just have more control, right? Like you have, I think at front of house, you definitely have more control because you don't have sound sources blasting you. But as a musician, you have more control as well. Yes. But that's not necessarily a pro, right? That's not necessarily a good thing to have more control. Depends on the gear and the situation, which we'll talk about. Okay. Well, let me ask you this then. Why would you not want a silent stage?
Why would I not want a silent stage?
Yeah, why would you want an amp?
Okay, I'm going to come at this from purely a bassist perspective because you're a bassist, I'm a bassist, and likely all of the people listening to this are bassists. So
right.
If you're a drummer, enjoy.
Yes.
Vibrations. It's so weird to play on a stage and you're like that low open C and there's just nothing.
Wait, did you say low open C?
Are you I just did a video.
Are you in drop?
I just did a video with drop C. So now I'm in my brain. I'm so glad that my brain has finally saved a drop C as an open C. Great.
That's amazing.
In a situation where you're playing metal and you've got that low open C.
Yeah, of course. Like whatever the note is, right? Like you're hearing something like you have air being moved.
Yes. Yeah. It's not integral necessarily, but it's so much more satisfying for music in general, but especially bass to have that like vibration sense. And even if it's not an amp, a wedge will do the same thing. Like having that sound.
A physical thing pushing air into, like pushing the sound waves into the air.
Yes.
Yes. I think too, so you're talking from a bass perspective. I totally agree with you. It feels so nice to have something moving air. I think that for all the instruments too. I love it when keyboards have little wedges. I love it when there's a guitar amp on stage. I prefer that, I think, as long as the band is being respectful of volumes and blending and all that. But I also think from an audience perspective, depending on the size of venue and where you are, like I've seen smaller shows where there's been silent stages, and the closer you get to the stage, and if you're kind of inside the throw of the PA, you don't hear anything but drums and kind of the faint PA bouncing off the wall, but you don't hear the band versus kind of that old school thing of like everybody's got an amp and there's vocal wedges. You kind of get close to the stage and you still hear a mix. You know?
It's like the IEM fix for that was the snarky puppy style of where you put headphones on the entire audience, or you have
everybody.
Yeah.
Yes. What was that called? Like Family Dinner or something, right? What was that called?
Volume 1 and 2. Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, so cool.
And it's become a thing. Headphone shows, they're a thing now in places. Yeah.
And I get it, because then you get this amazing mix, but the infrastructure has to be right. Yeah. There's so much infrastructure to make that work.
And limitation. I mean, of course there's limitation to halls in general, but I mean, now you need, if you want 500 people at your show, you need 500 sets of headphones.
Yep. Right.
And it's exhausting to wear headphones. Like, I don't know whether you've done like sound check, 3-hour sound check, and you're like on IEMs and you're tweaking stuff and you're getting like fatigued, and now you have to go on the show. After it, the only thing you want to do is take out your IEMs. Obviously, usually if you're in an audience, you have the cans on, and that'll be a little bit more comfortable, but even that gets exhausting.
I totally agree. I think and depending on the size of your ears, I've got like big ears, and like the edges of them will start to hurt. Or you wear IEMs for too long and there's something in your ear that starts to get sore.
Like,
I've
done IEM shows where after a while, especially if for some reason something at soundcheck gets messed up and you're now on stage for X amount of additional hours and you're wearing these things, eventually halfway through the show, I will sacrifice sound and just do this because my ear can't take it.
One in, one out, or just both
Which
out?
Which sucks. And we'll get to why you shouldn't be doing that with IEMs in general, but because it's just, if you're wearing them for like 8 hours,
it just starts to hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an overstimulation that comes with it as well. It's just, I mean, there's no air between you and your sound. It's just smack. Yeah.
Oh, I know. It and it can feel sort of like isolating and strange. Yeah. I will say, I know that so with the Berkeley Indian Music Ensemble, you guys are all on ears. Is that correct? When you tour? Mm-hmm. All on ears. And do you do any gigs right now where you have an amp?
No, we bought our system eventually. We caved for our last tour. We got the whole setup with, I don't even know. I'm thankfully, again, not the engineer. I do not want to have to deal with that, but like a whole S-Link situation. And then it takes a good amount of time to set this thing up. And usually we send the engineer in advance so that something is set up at least. And then you get there and more stuff has to happen. But it's not like a cakewalk at all to get it running.
It's a lot of gear, big rack of stuff. And typically, I think for those of you out there that are wondering what is that stuff, you basically have to provide all of the XLR cables and microphones. So you would mic a drum kit. You could use the house mics, but typically bands that do this sort of carry all their own stuff. Yeah. Vocal mics, bass DIs, whatever they're going to mic up guitar stuff with, if there's that, or, there's all these cables that you need, and that goes into a mixer. And then from that mixer, it splits out goes to front of house, so they have control. And then probably, does everyone just control their own mix from a phone or from an iPad?
We carry our little boxes, so you have the little monitor boxes that you control.
Yep. Or like a hardware box. Got it.
Yes. So now there's many levels of this, and that depends on obviously cost, level of musicians, and most importantly, level of engineer. The IEMs take a whole new level of stage knowledge, how the technology works from the engineer side of things. So we had, our last tour was a nightmare because it was our engineer's first time doing this as well.
Right.
And the first, 8 shows were just a catastrophe. We didn't get split mixes. So it was 4 of us sharing a mix and the other 4 sharing a mix. And I was like, why do I even have this thing? It's like, you're in theory supposed to be able to change stuff. If it doesn't work, it's a nightmare. Because then again, nobody wants to hear bass as much as I want to hear bass.
Right.
So it's like, well, can I get more bass? And everyone's like, no.
If you travel with your own in-ear system, there is so much, there's cost, there's so much gear to set it up, there's knowledge.
Yes.
And we don't have to get into all of that stuff. But yeah, basically you have to mic up and run cables for everything to keep it consistent.
Yes.
Right. And then, yeah, like Sharon's saying, there's either some kind of hardware box that you can adjust your levels, or you're doing it on a phone or an iPad or something. Another level of that is there's a venue that has all that stuff, right? And you are maybe just bringing your in-ear monitors, the things that physically go in your ears, and maybe they give you a wireless pack. That's like a church situation. That infrastructure is figured out. It's there. It lives there. Typical at churches where you roll in and they give you a pack and you plug into it, but then you're expected to mix like 20 inputs of audio. Well, you can pan the kick drum, or you can add reverb to the snare, or wow. And then it takes a lot of know-how on the part of the musicians to be able to put what they need in their ears. And sometimes there's a monitor engineer for that. I've had it a lot of ways. I've done all the way from really terrible monitor mixes where I'm sharing IEM mixes with people and it sounds bad and thin and the bass is small and
quacky.
And there's some routing issues and it's just a nightmare, all the way up to another name drop here. I got to play with Gavin DeGraw and we opened up for Billy Joel, and Gavin DeGraw's monitor guy, who I forget his name because it was a long time ago, was amazing. And he basically could do custom things in between songs. He kind of knew that if, like wherever you were on stage, kind of what to give you. He had crowd mics there that he mixed in a little bit. Like it sounded amazing.
Yes.
And I had an SVT behind me moving air.
Nice.
It was
Very nice.
The most incredible, but that takes a ton of infrastructure.
Even more than infrastructure, it just honestly takes a little bit of exercise on your end to get used to hearing music that you're playing through this. Especially for bass, it's a little different. For vocalists, it's really hard because you're now trying to like match pitch, even though you can't. Like you can't do this. You can't do the like. You can't, because you're just shoving more sound into your ears.
They're already in there. Yeah, right.
So it takes a whole new level of being able to separate like nuanced sections of music in your brain while simultaneously emitting music from yourself, whether it's voice, whether it's intonation. Instruments are harder. So probably with a fretless, it would be a very similar situation. And it's a whole new like skill set that you essentially have to acquire. And a lot of times it's done on the road because
totally.
You get dropped into it.
Or for me, it was in church. I think a lot of people experience that as well. Like I had never done an in-ear gig. I started to play at a church and they were like, here, put these in. And some terrible Shure with the yellow foam, the like, the yellow foam that, maybe they're reusing some of them. No, I don't know. But right. I mean, it like a little funky and just didn't know what I was doing with a mix and like, So this actually brings me, we're kind of already talking about this, but let's talk about some pros and cons. Let's talk about pros and cons to in-ears first. And let's talk about it from a player perspective. So let's do this. Let's start out with cons about dealing with in-ears. You have some?
Probably kind of building on that. It takes a lot of getting used to it. It takes a lot of work.
Yes.
To get it to work for you and to work for a band. The kind of music will define it as well. Like different styles require different things, different instruments require different things. And then if it doesn't work, everything sucks.
If it doesn't work, you don't hear your instrument.
Yeah, it falls apart bad.
Right. High risk.
Yes. High risk, high reward, and high risk, like complete shitfest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting used to it, getting used to the sound. Like right now, I'm very used to the sound of my bass through in-ears because we record a ton of content.
Right.
And I've set it up in a way that like the low end sounds big to me, but it's not moving any air in the room.
No.
But that is something that you have to get used to. You hear yourself very clearly. And like all of the things.
On the other hand, because we're so used to this, our comfort, our mix, if you do show up at an in-ear gig and you don't get your own personal mix, you don't have control over that. It's even more frustrating because you now do not have the thing that you're used to, which is like your bass up front with full control. And now it's buried, only highs, all of that stuff where it's just like,
oh, there's so much more. Yeah. So, right. Another con is like if of variability, right? Yeah. Like there's so much variability. And if you have control of the mix or not, if you've got an amp and you've got your and there's nothing in your ears, at least you can kind of snuggle up to your amp.
Just go to your amp. Right. Exactly.
Yes. And there's none of that. I think another con for me is, the isolation that it can breed. So I would see this. So I was an MD at this church for a long time. And sometimes what I would see, I like my mix to sound like a record with just a little more bass and actually slightly less vocal. So I kind of swap the role of vocal and bass. Like I'm hearing bass forward and I'm hearing vocal kind of set back into the mix a bit. But other than that, I want to hear panning of the guitars. I want to hear drums big and full. Like I have a little click in there. I want it to sound similar to a record.
Exactly.
But sometimes when I would listen to other people's mixes, I would be shocked at what they were choosing to listen to. They'd be listening to like click blasting and only themselves. And I was like, oh, weird. You know, that means that then you're really only playing in sort of a like a click time or like in this sort of echo chamber isolation. And I found that I'm used to camaraderie on stage. I'm used to someone doing something in the band noticing. And
it's
I think
visually going to change it as well. If someone is only hearing themselves, you know they're
in their own zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't police people's mixes. I mean, I suppose you could go through and be like, "Hey, shouldn't you have a little something else in your mix?" But no one's doing that, right?
I think a lot of times I've found that not everyone knows how to mix, and it's something that you have to learn on, like, as you go.
Totally.
But I've found that a lot of engineers will notice that, and it'll affect how they mix later on because people are playing differently depending on what they're hearing and what they're not hearing. And a good engineer will usually give you a pre-mixed thing on your, like our guy would go in and like give a level to everyone and based on that.
We'll say, here's a starting mix.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's usually really helpful and safer for everyone involved.
I got another con for you. They can be so expensive. And I'm just talking about the in-ears themselves.
Not even the systems.
Not the system. Yeah. Churches spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these rigs. And you can spend as little as, you can get, crispy Amazon buds for probably $50 all the way up to you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on custom molded, all that stuff. And we can talk about custom molded and universal, but price. And I'm not sure there's a level. I haven't used all the things, but I've used a variety of things. And there's a level of diminishing returns once you get above a certain price point, I think. And, there's adding drivers and, from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. Now there's stuff that has like 18. I'm sure there's stuff that even has more than 20
I've
drivers.
Seen some that are like absurd. I'm like, what?
Yeah. and that to me feels there's so many options and so many price points that I think that it can be kind of daunting to get in. So we'll give you some recommendations in a bit here, but price of these things, and they're delicate and they're fragile. And if a little bit of wax goes in and then it just stops and then you're like, oh, my in-ears are broken, but maybe you just need to clean them. They're so fiddly. That's another thing. I'm saying a con is they're fiddly, Sharon. They're fiddly.
They're also small. Like it's not a cable, like an instrument cable or a bass. It's more like a pick in terms of
right.
You can lose this so easily.
Yes.
And
totally.
I had a decent pair at one point. I spent good money on it.
And you lost them.
And I lost them, and I have never spent good money on them again because I know I'm going to lose them.
I too, I have a similar story where I spent $1,000 on a pair, and then went back to these, and we'll talk about that in a sec. It was the custom versus universal, but I want to see if you have any more cons before we move on. Any more cons of these in-ear monitors?
No, I really liked the isolation though. That was a good one. I did not think about that.
Yeah,
that's so true.
I'm sure we're missing some in the comments below too.
One.
Oh yeah, please.
I have one. Oh my god! If you are playing with a click, the weirdest thing visually for an audience. Let's say you're starting off a song and it's the super vibey, I don't know, guitar thing. I don't know, something super vibey.
Yeah.
And obviously, as an audience member, you don't hear or see the click. But the most disruptive thing is to have a vibey like guitar and you've got the bassist just going.
Because they're hearing the click?
Feeling the click, and like I don't know, maybe they're coming in with a groovy thing. Like it's just so, not just the bassist, any musician. If you're like, it's one thing to tap your foot, but I feel like there comes like with great power comes great responsibility. Just because you have the click, you have to like react to the music with the click as well. Because if it's just a beautiful, you can't be like rocking out because it just visually doesn't.
This speaks to isolation, right?
Yes, it
it's
does.
Like, if the bass player has that thing cranked, the church thing too, for the longest time, these big switches on pedal boards. So the click starts and then, this is happening.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like switching through all of these or tap tempo, right?
Yes.
Like trying to get the delay set. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Yeah. And you would be aware of that if you didn't have something in your ears.
Yeah.
Right? Because it sort of like blocks out all of this stuff. Let's move over to pros. And we can blast through this. I think one thing that is a huge pro is that you will save your hearing over time. Even if you monitor kind of loud, there is nothing as damaging as being by a drum kit with big snare shots all night, cymbals all night, sound pressure levels. Like even when you think, I'm not saying crank your in-ears up and woohoo, right? You should definitely be careful, but a satisfying volume in in-ears is nothing compared to being smashed by zillion Z's all night. You know what I mean? Yes. So there's something about, and that in my generation, I there were no in-ears, there's no such thing. And now there are, and a lot of people, I'm going to drop another name here, was speaking to Mike Dirnt from Green Day. And I asked him like, hey, what would you have done differently or something? I asked him some question like that. And he was like, protect my ears. I wish I would have worn protection. And this is a route to that. It's a really nice way to have a comfortable level to not be always goosing volume because you're hearing things clearly and to protect your ears. I think that's a big, big pro to in-ears. I've also got, we've talked about it, gives engineers more control. It gives the band more control. The isolation can be a con. What's another pro? I've got one. I think that you hear your bass. It might be a painful pro, but you hear what you're doing on the bass more clearly. Yeah.
If you had a good gig, you'll be more satisfied. If you had a bad gig, you'll be more
And even small things like articulations. If you're the kind of player with an amp that's used to playing this way.
Yes.
Sometimes you can't hear that sort of click or clack with an amp at your ankles. And then you get it into in-ears and you realize, oh, I should be thinking about playing with a different approach or different touch. So things come into focus so clearly with ears. And I think that that's really good for your awareness.
Agreed.
Of your own sound and your own playing.
Yeah. It's kind of the same thing as I usually recommend students to record yourself and hear yourself back, because that's when you're really going to feel how you sound, because in the moment with the clank and everything, you don't actually know what your bass sounds like on a mix, on a recording.
Yes.
The IEMs will definitely get you one step closer to that instantly. So I agree.
Absolutely.
Another one.
Yeah, go for it.
Another one is if you're on a wireless pack, on wireless in-ears and wireless cables, the incredible amount of freedom on stage, especially if you're playing a larger stage.
Yes.
Your sound doesn't change whether you're next to the vocalist, next to the bassist, out in the crowd. Your sound is just steady and incredible. But you have to be on wireless packs. But it makes an insane difference. Even just for sound check, it allows you to go out, take your in-ears off, be like, oh, I don't know about this in the room, put them back in, go, like, just wireless packs in general.
Freedom.
Will give you,
Freedom. Yeah, absolutely. I will say, too, that once I started to play with in-ears and got used to it, I found that when I did studio sessions, I was so appreciative of not having to use the crappy studio headphones. So a lot of times bass players, right, we have to play in the room with the drum. So I'll do sessions where I'm next to the drummer, and if you're wearing the studio headphones, there's bleed and the drums are right there and you're cranking stuff to hear it. Oh my God, the isolation and the noise reduction that these do. I mean, I feel like, you put in-ears and it's almost like a 30 dB reduction of outside noise. So you can be right by a drum kit, mix it into your ears a little bit and play. And it's like, oh, it feels so much more manageable. And I've got another one here that it sets you up. Learning how to play with in-ears sets you up for more situations that are professional. So for instance, I have a gig where I play with this artist Dessa, and we got to do a basketball halftime. And I just sound like I'm like dropping these like these, but I don't mean to. It's just true. The basketball halftime was the fastest setup possible. And, I'm plugging into my pedal board, which I know really well, and getting a sound right to my ears immediately. I play through this pedal board every day. I know what the octave sounds like. I know what the drive through ears sounds like. And I'm not at the mercy of the room, right? Or an engineer, how good or bad she or he may be. And so it feels great to have that consistency, to learn how to do it, and then have the consistency and then be able to just roll. So you set up, what you're plugging into, you've got your pedal board set up maybe, or whatever, even if you're just plugging into a tuner, but you know how your bass sounds here. And it never changes because you're not at the mercy of the room. Yeah. And then you don't have to worry about that. And I think that is really, really nice, as long as, like Sharon and I said in the beginning, the infrastructure of the tech is in place, whether your band is providing or the venue is providing. Yeah. Any other pros that you can think of?
I mean, just back to the thing that I said at the beginning, mixing, having a quiet stage is it's going to make mixing both front of house and for post-production sake so much easier.
Hang on. Did we miss a con? Maybe we said this, but one con is there's no frickin' bass, depending on the in-ears you choose. Right?
I am so glad you mentioned this because
there's no freaking bass.
Yeah, it depends on the drivers. You'll have if you have more drivers, you might have more bass. And I have actually a couple of low, cheaper end options with bass that I will share in a bit.
Yeah.
There is, and I don't have one of these things, but I really want one. So get backbeat if you want to hook a girl up.
The thing that goes on your back,
it's a thing
attaches
that you
to your strap.
Yeah, you attach it to your strap. You attach your in-ears, and I believe everything essentially gets hooked into this hub, and it vibrates, and it essentially gets rid of the need for the amp feeling of vibration because it vibrates through your bones. You do not technically even, if I'm not mistaken, you don't even need the in-ears to be able to hear the bass if your bass is plugged in because you feel the vibration. Obviously,
feel
it's
the notes?
clearer. I might be wrong. This is what I've heard. Again,
Wait, have you not tried it?
I've not tried it.
Oh, then you can't recommend this.
No, but so
You
many of
cannot.
my friends have tried it, and they keep telling me to get it. And then I tried getting it for the tour, and it was in the phase between Backbeat 1 being no longer in production and Backbeat 2 about to be dropped, and so I couldn't get it for the tour, but I was gonna, and I haven't needed it since. So
you're saying maybe check
one-offs.
it out. There's a few things like this. Okay, so Backbeat, it's like a little box that vibrates. You attach it to your strap. I will say it's too fiddly for me. It's like the cable for my in-ears going to that, the cable for my bass to that, and then there's cables that run out from that into the, and your strap is heavy, and you take it off and it bonks your bass and puts a dent in it. No, I'm not into it.
I want to try it.
But I haven't tried it. So Sharon is saying, get it, but she hasn't tried it. And I'm saying,
really
do not get it. And I haven't tried it.
I have it on good authority that it's worth trying.
I would definitely try it. Have you tried this? Check this out. Another thing to mitigate this, like, oh, I can't feel the vibration, is those platforms. They're called I don't know. There's a bunch of companies that make them. It started with Butt Kicker that made a thing that would attach to a drummer's throne. Yeah. You hit the kick drum. It's like a servo or amp that like shakes the throne of your what you're sitting on as a drummer. Yeah. And then they make these like platforms that you can stand on. Ike makes one. There's a few companies that do. I used to play at a church that had one, and I would stand on it for a minute and then I would like get off of it because it was so big. It felt like what I would want is it just barely on, because it felt like every time I would play a low note, it would just be like, and then if I played something up high that still had like nice low mid content, it wouldn't rattle at all. So I just kept wanting to play like soft down low.
Oh,
so my
awkward.
platform would shake. And it did the opposite of what I would want in in-ears. It gave me a really distorted picture of how my low end was transferring, like in the house, because I was standing on this thing that was just shaking. Yeah. I don't know.
I think
Have you played one of those before?
I have not played one of those before. I'm not sure I'd want to, because it's not a realistic thing for me to be able to replicate in every situation. Like, I'm not going to be lugging a platform around. Which is why I would prefer to try the Backbeat, because it's like a little thing.
Because it's small. Yes.
It's small. It's portable. But yeah.
I will say this. I did a tour once where I was stationary on a platform. We had small, like little wedge monitors that had no bass. But the crew built in to my wooden platform that I stood on a small wooden square that had a servo motor. And essentially it would shake my entire platform. So, and they would take it out and they would drop it in and zit, 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 put 4 screws in it every gig. And we had this huge power amp, and I just had it barely on. So it wasn't like, whoa, like it could get crazy. It could shake the hell out of it.
Right.
But we
it's
just
a little
had
more
it
customizable.
barely on. And oh man, I've got to say that when it was the entire floor that just had a little bit of vibration, it was cool. But that's like, you're not going to travel unless you're on a tour, a professional tour where that's happening. That's not going to likely be in your future. I've only ever experienced it once. And so, maybe Backbeat. But there's this thing of like, there's no bass. Okay, so I love YouTube. You probably love YouTube. But let's be honest. It's not the best platform for in-depth teaching. Enter the SBL Academy. At SBL, we break down the bass with a curriculum-driven approach that spans from complete beginner level to super advanced. We also cover all kinds of genres, skills, and techniques, all brought to you by world-class bass instructors. And best of all, you can get started today for free at trysbl.com. Let's move into some recommends, because if you get the right in-ears, I think you may be very happy with the amount of low end that they might give you, right? Should we talk about universal versus custom first?
Sure. I think it kind of For me, Universal just immediately raises the price. Custom immediately raises the price. So I feel like I'd want to go...
And what we're talking about here, like, I feel like it's really important to clarify this. Like, custom molded means you go into a place and they squirt stuff in your ear and they take impressions of your ears. And then you get these supposedly custom, beautiful, incredible, molded to your ears monitors that when you put them in, they're comfortable and they fit and they seal. That's something that's very important about getting low end to transfer, is the seal of the, of the product in your ear.
I have a question. Why did you say supposedly?
Yeah, because I've been down this road. I spent $1,000 on very nice in-ears by All Claire. They're a company here in Minneapolis, and they make great stuff. Their stuff sounds awesome. And I don't think because of their product, but because of my body and my ears, when I would raise my eyebrows or I would like open my mouth to sing, I would pop my seal. And then there's no low end, and then outside noise comes in, and it's this jarring experience. That in general is actually should be added to the con list, because it doesn't only have to do with whether it's like, even with these. Even it can happen.
If you're smiling, if you're singing, sometimes I've had in-ears where I had to have
calm demeanor.
Face. Yeah, because at the minute you go, boop, and you're like, oh god,
yeah, right.
You'll
like lose your seal.
So that's definitely
I have experienced that personally more with the custom molds.
For sure.
And I went back, people were like, oh, did you go back in and get them remolded? Yes. Did you use the bite block where you chomp on the thing and then it opens up? Yes. I did all the things, and I still would come back to these universals. So I'll tell you what I use. And these would go on the recommend list for me. I use not Shure. I had some Shures for a while, and I transitioned to Westone. And these are the UM3Xs, and they're old. They don't even make them anymore. 3 drivers, not crazy money. They're maybe $300-$400. I think you can get a similar, probably improved product from Westone now for that same amount of money. I just have 3 drivers. In my fancy ones that were custom molded, I had 6 drivers. They sounded great, but that fit issue was so brutal that I wanted to just go back to these. These are also a little smaller. They're a little easier to deal with. They're actually a little more comfortable over a long period of time, even though the customs were supposed to be more comfortable. So depending on your needs, your body, your ears, how much your ears move when you move your eyebrows or forehead or smile or whatever, right? Your mileage may vary, but I am a guy who went through the whole thing and came back to a quality pair of universals. Universal just means you can change the tips, right? Yeah. You can put foamy earpluggy stuff on it. You can put silicone. I have the silicone ones on mine now, and I think they do a great job. They're comfortable. They let a lot of low end through. They maybe don't keep as much outside out, but in this environment, that's fine.
It's essentially like earplugs at that point. Like it does enough to like.
I think so. Yeah. So that's a big recommend for me, would be the Westone line. And also I've since checked out some stuff from All Claire that they make universals now too. And their stuff is awesome. They have a lot of options that aren't crazy money, but that have great drivers. So that's another company that I've checked out that I can for sure recommend. Yeah. How about you?
What's the price range on the Westones?
So you can buy Westone universals from, I think, about $200 up to about $1,500.
Yeah. Tracks.
Yep. And you just get more drivers, you get more headroom, right? I personally am a big fan of like a flat response, maybe a slightly boosted bass response, but I don't want, they'll custom do these drivers and build EQ curves into them. So, a hype for singers so that, there's 1 and 4K that are pushed, or like bass boomers that are like all this. And I just think that stuff sounds terrible. Whenever I've tried those types of things, I'm like, ugh. Like I want it to sound like, if I played music on my phone, I'd want it to sound great through them. So Yeah, I feel like a flat response or maybe slightly bass boosted response is what I'm always looking for. And I don't think you have to spend more than $500 actually to get a set that feels pretty damn good as a bass player. But what do you think?
I can't remember what the pair was that I had that I lost. I think it was an Ultimate Ears pack. It was great.
Yep.
Ultimate
Ears is a big one.
Yeah, they're huge. They're some of the bigger one of the bigger brands that does IEMs. They have Universal, they have customs. I think I had a customs, but at the lower range of stuff. It was great. I did not use it a lot. I think I lost it within 4 months.
Got it. Yeah.
That's just me.
Bummer.
So eventually I was gifted these, which are the Shure SC215s. They're like some of the most common in-ears that people have, that studios will have just lying around for people because they're cheap. They're like $100. I use these for content. Mm-hmm. The reason I do this is because I lose stuff really easily. So I have a content pack that is here with my content stuff. It never leaves the house. It never leaves the room. It's just with my stuff. They're good. They do the job. I don't know what the drivers on these are. I think it's probably 2 or something. It's not outrageous. I used to use them on gigs, and bass was bad. If I didn't have enough control over my mix on the box, these would start messing with me.
Yeah.
And it was really painful. So it depends on your situation. They're good for studio, not necessarily like different halls will affect different things. They're not incredibly isolating. So you'll still be at the mercy of a lot of things wearing these. But the ones that I now use for stage is going to blow your mind.
I can't wait. Tell me it's that crispy Amazon set.
Yes.
Yes, okay. It is.
Wait a minute.
Okay, I can't wait.
These are $50, $49.99 on Amazon. They've got 5 drivers.
Whoa.
And they're called the KZ ZS10 Pro.
Okay.
And they're not in any way comparable to like a custom IEM or something, but they're solid. They feel a little cheap. Like the build feels a little cheap.
Sure, yeah.
But the sound is probably great. 10 times what these are.
Wow.
And I tried them. I ordered them midway in the tour because I was having a really hard time with these.
Yeah, sure.
And the drummer who was subbing for us for a couple of the tour dates, he plays a lot of the like LA larger shows and stuff. And he was like, okay, if you want a quick fix, get these. And he recommended them. And he has them in his backpack always in case his crap
like a
out
backup
or something.
pair.
They're like his like sworn by backup pair. He's like, get them, prime them overnight to tomorrow's hotel. I did that. I got them. I tested them at soundcheck. I kid you not, worlds apart.
Wow.
Yeah. And I played the rest of the tour with that set. And wait, to make matters more intense.
Love it.
I was like, oh, this was great. Amazing. And then our pianist / MD was like, oh, what are these? So she ordered them overnight to the next hotel. Yep. And she was like, oh my God, these are so much better than the ones that she was using. So now she was on those as well. And then the third night came and our main vocalist was like, what are these? And he ordered them overnight.
Amazing.
And he went from custom IEMs, like 1,500 and up, to those for the tour.
You know, that's so good to hear because I do feel like there's a little bit of like you know how when certain products you kind of wonder, is there some like snake oil and marketing going on here? You know, like it's not like every one of these companies is building their own tiny micro drivers. They're all buying them from the same place. Yeah. Right. And so when you're paying, $8,000 for some crazy custom set of Ultimates or JH or 64 ears or whatever, like there's some really high end companies that you can spend thousands of dollars.
Right.
You're wondering, what are we really spending here? Right. So I love that and not to say that stuff isn't good. It might be. And hey, you know what?
Not at all.
You're grown. You can spend your money on whatever you want. Right. But how cool is it that there's a $50 option? Because you're a pro, Shaz. You're out on the road with the Berkeley Indian Music Ensemble with $50 ears.
But I do want to preface this with saying we did not have the ideal in-ear setup. As I mentioned, the engineer was not super comfortable with the equipment that we had. Everything was a little bit wonky. So even though I had my own mix, it wasn't like stuff from what he was doing in a front of house was feeding into our thing. Like for some reason, stuff had reverb when it wasn't supposed to have reverb. Like it was a mess. So at one point I was like, I am not getting bass, even though I have cranked bass and dropped everyone down and it's still not working. So that's why I ended up being in a conversation with our drummer, and he was like, try these. And that really elevated the experience. And I think everyone was having that feeling of just there being no low end because
emptiness,
it was getting cut in the front of house. So obviously ours was a very unique situation that all three of us were feeling like we needed help in that regard. That being said, we all still use those, even though we have switched engineers since. And we also use those for these, to this day. Amazing. With that gig.
See, it's so cool. So there's no excuse. It's not like, oh, I'd have to buy $1,000 in-ears to try the crispy Amazon recommends.
Especially until you've actually like exercised your ear and your brain to be able to play with in-ears, to adjust yourself to playing with in-ears. There's no point in you dishing out even, quite frankly, $500 on a pair of in-ears. Because if you don't like it, you don't really need it. Obviously, a gig might require it, but then at that point, why spend $500 on something that you need very rarely?
Yeah,
when you could get the $50 option. So, yeah.
Yes. I will say, I'm just going to add one more thing to the pro list, that even outside of your gig, what I found, and this was probably in an era before AirPods, before like wireless buds, but having a really, really nice set of like earphones to listen to music, to listen to podcasts, to be on a plane, and like put those in, and it just like, and even the plane content sounds good. You don't need to grab those wired crap buds that they hand you for free on the plane. Like having your own set of like professional wired buds. You can plug your bass into a little practice preamp and use that, and it sounds awesome. Like they go beyond on stage, or at least they did for me for a long time.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I absolutely
like, it's cool I love flying and being like, no thanks to the free buds, because I've got like a really nice pair,
and like buffs out the plane noise, because sometimes with the plane headphones you're like, what is my movie saying?
Awful.
And you need subtitles, but then with these guys you just put them in and you got the stage
and there's no battery, so they don't die. You don't need to charge them like your AirPods, so passive noise canceling, because they're earplugs, not active noise canceling. It's cool. So let's do this, Sharon. To wrap it up, is the era of the amp over? What say you, Sharon Reynolds?
This is a hard one. I don't want to say yes, but I think professionally, yes.
Oh, really? You think professionally, yes?
I just think larger stages at this point are more and more turning into just in-ear. And even if they might have an amp on stage, you're probably still running ears.
Interesting. I will say that I'm going to say no. In fact, I think that there's even a bit of a backlash. I see in some people that are like, oh, they've had the experience of like the ears dying, and so now they're not going to run a silent stage. They're going to have cabs and amps on stage. I've seen that with full in-ear bands, like Intervals, Jacob Umansky. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they ever ran a completely silent stage, but now they've got cabs, so it fills the front. When I'm playing, like for instance, when I'm out with Eric Hutchinson, he hates ears. So we're just full on old school. And so it's interesting, when I moved out of church world and into other gig scenarios, I almost hardly ever use the in-ears again. Mm. I will wear one with Dessa because I need to hear a click. But with all the gigs that I play, every single one of them now, I have an amp. on stage. So I think I don't think actually the amp is ever going to die. I think that there will always be a need for air moving. Now, I'm 45, Shaz. I could just be old guy talking here.
I hope you're right. I think if I had to choose, I would, despite knowing the freedoms of IEMs, I would most likely usually choose an amp these days. I've just had nightmare stories of providing a rider or having the band provide a rider, and you just get shit on the day. I've had days where I show up and there's no amp. They're like, oh, you needed a bass amp. Oh, and you're like, the craziest stuff has happened that it's easier to just have your band travel with the IEMs and then you're
for the
good.
ears.
But,
yep, sure. Yeah.
But showing up, having a rider, if I was with my own rig the entire time, if I had that kind of a gig and I've got my 7 basses and that fancy thing and I got my cab, I think I would go cab any day.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, obviously I think the best thing is both. There have been gigs that I've played where you've got a big amp, you've even got some wedges with a nice little mix there, and you've got ears, and you can kind of choose. You can pop one out. Ooh, it sounds nice.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. But that's few and far between. I think I still prefer being on stage with amps with a great band in a great room without ears. I prefer that, but I'm from that, And I've had great experiences with ears as well. I will say, though, I think everybody should learn how to play with them.
I agree.
Every bass player out there, you should get comfortable with the sound of your bass and how you play using a set of ears. And Sharon just cracked the code. You can get some for $50. I don't know if we'll put a link in the description to those. I'm not sure that we'll do that. But Sharon, say them again. What are they again?
They are the KZ-ZS10 Pro.
Yep.
They also have a non-pro version. I don't know.
And I've never used those, but I think if you want to maybe an elevated experience in terms of build, cable, components, maybe sound, although I haven't heard those, I'm going to recommend the Westone stuff. All the Westone universals are awesome. I've used I've had these for over 10 years and they still work great. I know. Wow. Great. I haven't lost them, haven't broken them. So guys, let us know in the comments, actually, if you've had nightmare experiences or if you've had amazing experiences, but something that stands out to you about participating in an IEM situation on stage or participating in a full-on amp blast. I want to either know high highs or low lows of either situation. And if you have more recommends for people, if you're like, oh, you got to check out these ears, please let us know in the comments. We read this stuff and it helps the whole community if you drop that stuff down there. So other than that, if you've enjoyed the episode, please remember to like and subscribe, and we're going to see you in the next one.